What is the literal best type of exercise when it comes down to visceral fat or belly fat? It's very easy to look at the literature and think that, okay, long-term resistance training is what I need, because resistance training is arguably more metabolically, advantageous because you create more metabolically active tissue. I want to dig deep into this because as someone that truly enjoys resistance training, I just had a hard time drinking the Kool-Aid entirely. I also enjoy my cardiovascular work, but I also understand that cardiovascular work doesn't really benefit the same skeletal muscle systems that you would get with resistance training. So I dug deep, and the first body of research was pretty interesting. This one was published in Obesity Reviews, and it wasn't just this small study. It was a 35 study meta-analysis that looked at resistance training versus control versus aerobic exercise when it came down to its impact on visceral belly fat. You want to know what was wild? Some of my suspicions were kind of confirmed that, at least in the relative short term, but even moderate long term, resistance training itself had about the same impact as, well, the control, not exercising at all, which is kind of weird. Now, if we dug a little bit deeper, we'd find that aerobic training had a significant impact. But I mean, let's be real here. We're all intelligent grown-ups, and we could see that, if you were to just be a cardio freak forever, that's going to come with its own downfalls, right? You're going to have small amounts of muscle, you're going to have poor bone density, all these other lifestyle factors that matter. But when we're looking at visceral fat, aerobic does seem to be the answer. However, we still need to understand more, because what is visceral fat mainly associated with when it comes down to losing it? Most people would say, well, there are a high amount of what are called glucocorticoid receptors in the visceral fat or in the belly fat. That means they're hypersensitive to cortisol, hypersensitive to stress. And I've talked about this in other videos, but this is not a regurgitated type of information. We're getting into newer stuff. So what that means is that when you have a stress response, it can potentially negatively impact visceral fat because you're stressed and you're eating, but you can also have a stress response that can actually influence the fat loss, right? So in theory, higher intensity bouts would make more sense. So in theory, would high intensity bouts of resistance training work? Because most people look at resistance training and they think it's anaerobic, so it's creating it needs energy fast, and it's anaerobic and glycolytic, so it's got to be high intensity. It seems as though the intensity itself doesn't necessarily matter. It's more about the intensity demand when it comes down to a VO2 max cardiovascular system. So anyway, let me explain a little bit more. We need to dive into the effect of growth hormone and how growth hormone plays a role in not only our glucocorticoid receptors, but also how growth hormone plays a role in lipolysis, energy balance, and overall. If you resistance train, it's arguably very, very good for growth hormone. But what people don't factor in is that cardio is also very good for growth hormone. Both of them increase growth hormone. I mean, you could, I guess, kind of say that growth hormone is going to be increased a little bit more with resistance training, especially with larger movements. But all you're doing is influencing growth hormone and possibly getting bigger pulses at night. What about circulating growth hormone throughout the course of the day as well, little pulses as the day goes on? If you were to work out and burn 500 calories in an hour, and I were to work out and burn 500 calories in 10 minutes, we both burned 500 calories, energy is matched. Who's going to have a larger growth hormone response? I am. The higher the intensity, the more the growth hormone response. So it still doesn't give us the answer, because again, I know plenty of people that go into the gym and do some really balls to the wall, resistance training work that is highly intense. And you could argue that they're getting a good cardiovascular benefit and getting this overall growth hormone response. Well, we need to understand even more. Okay, sometimes it's about your fueling strategy. Okay, when are you doing this kind of work? If you are purely fueled, you might have more peak power and ultimately be able to have more intensity. So that's going to drive up growth hormone more. However, if you do that, you're also impeding some of the fat oxidation that comes with training in a fasted state. So what does it look like? Well, we're starting to get to an answer here. Think about it. It's starting to seem like short, intense bouts of activity done frequently might be the best. But also how you eat in tandem with this might be very, very important, right? So when it comes down to visceral fat, it's usually a metabolic issue, right? So being active is the first step to fixing this, but there's some pretty strong links between two very, very critical nutrients here. There are strong links between saturated fat intake, usually in people that are like eating the standard American diet, not necessarily carnivore or keto type people. High saturated fat is heavily linked with non-alcoholic fatty liver disease, heavily linked with visceral fat. Okay, another thing that's heavily linked with it is high levels of circulating glucose, hyperinsulinemia. Both of these things are problematic. Okay, so we do need to make a concerted effort, no matter what kind of diet we're doing, to reduce our sugar intake and reduce our saturated fat intake. That is, as simple as it sounds, the biggest nutritional levers that we can probably pull. Intermittent fasting works amazing. Low carb works amazing. All these different things, they work well. But these two levers are the biggest levers you can pull in tandem with your exercise. Okay? I also put a link down below for Thrive Market. I have some new products with Thrive Market that you might like, ones that I literally created myself. They are different forms of dessert type nut butters. So I have a cinnamon Brazil nut butter, I have a chocolate hazelnut butter, and a macadamia nut butter. And they're sweetened with allulose, so they automatically have that impact on potentially reducing blood sugar anyway, because allulose has some interesting research behind that. But they just taste delicious. I've been working on them for 2 years. Thrive Market is an online grocery store, so whether you get my nut butters or not, I don't really care. I would like you to try them, but it's a great place to get your groceries. It's literally a grocery store now, and it gets delivered to your doorstep, and that link down below saves you 30% off whatever you want, including my nut butters, including the fresh items, including the frozen items, and including everything else. And you can sort by diet type, so you can get things that don't have any sugar. If you grocery shop and you're human, you should check it out. It is game-changing stuff. Link down below beneath this video. So now we need to know when we should be doing this and when we should be surging and having more intensity. There was a study that was published in Sports Medicine that looked specifically at growth hormone pulses. They found that chronic bouts of aerobic exercise inside a 24-hour period ended up increasing growth hormone and fat loss significantly more than single bouts of either resistance training or cardio. So when we wanted these higher continual amounts of growth hormone circulating and potentially like stimulation or I guess even like inactivation of these glucocorticoid receptors, it seems as though continual movement and continual endurance bouts worked the best. So how does this play out for someone that needs to lose belly fat? What does a day look like? In theory, it would make sense to have multiple short bouts of intense activity, even if it doesn't mean you're breaking a horrendous sweat. So if you rolled out of bed and in a fasted state did 10 minutes of intervals, maybe 30 seconds on, 1 minute off, 30 seconds on, 1 minute off, high intensity, that's going to improve your growth hormone pulses. That could potentially improve your visceral fat, especially if you're in a fasted state based upon the literature. Then let's say later on in the day, you have an opportunity to do 20 burpees or hop on an assault bike or run some sprints. That would work, right? Little short bouts. And then later in the day, do some form of resistance training in sort of an EMOM type fashion. What does that mean? Like every minute on the minute. You want to move fast. Your goal isn't build as much muscle as possible right now. Your goal is, how do I get the muscle stimulation, the stimulus to grow muscle while still tapping into the benefits that I would get from cardio without completely degrading my workout, right? Like if you're inexperienced, going and doing a bunch of squats and then doing some assault bike is probably going to be counterproductive for you because you're not conditioned enough to recover enough to still get subsequent squat sets that are worthwhile. For example, if I squatted 225 pounds and then I were to do a bunch of assault bike and then jump back in and try to do 225 again, it would be more difficult. I'm conditioned, I can probably pull it off. People that are not used to that, you're going to maybe get one rep. You might even be able not to do it at all because you're totally spent. So we need to maintain our intensity. And that is the entire idea here. How do you maintain intensity, since that seems to be the biggest driving force for reducing belly fat? Belly fat, visceral fat, seems to come as a result of poor diet, inactivity, and probably not enough positive stress stimulus. So although you want your workouts to be fun, relaxing, inviting, and enough for you to do it again, you want them to be intense. So where's the balance? Intensity, but keep them short enough so you don't break your body down. And every time you have the opportunity, do 2 or 3 short workouts per day instead of one obliterating workout that completely takes everything away. As always, keep it locked in here on my channel. I'll see you tomorrow.